You're standing at the edge of a cliff. Below you is everything you've ever cared about, your relationships, your reputation, your dreams, and in your hands you're holding a thread connected to all of it. But it's not strong, it's fragile. And the more you care, the more you pull, the more it frays. That's when it hits you. The secret isn't in pulling harder, it's in letting go. That's what Machiavelli whispered through the centuries. The more you care, the more you lose control. But when you learn to care less, you start to control everything.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
This isn't about apathy, it's about strategy. We've been taught to invest emotionally in everything: relationships, projects, opinions, outcomes. But emotional overinvestment is the first step to losing power. Machiavelli said, "He who wishes to be obeyed must know how to command." You cannot command when your emotions are tangled in the outcome. You cannot lead when your sense of self is tied to how others respond. Caring too much makes you reactive. And power doesn't live in reaction. It lives in control. Let's dissect this at a psychological level. When we care too much, we give away leverage. We become predictable. People know exactly how to trigger us, how to manipulate us, how to destabilize us. When you care too deeply about being liked, they withhold approval. When you crave attention, they give it conditionally. When your peace depends on someone else's behavior, you're no longer in control of your state. And when you're not in control of your state, you're not in control of anything. Machiavelli understood this dynamic. He warned that rulers who were too generous, too emotional, too dependent on popularity would eventually be destroyed. Why? Because the more they cared about how they were perceived, the more they lost their grip on reality. He said, "A prince who is not himself wise cannot be wisely advised." That's because caring too much clouds wisdom. It makes you chase illusions. It makes you prioritize peace over power. And peace without power is always temporary. So how do we apply this? We begin by emotionally detaching from what we cannot control. You can influence people, but you cannot control them. You can prepare for outcomes, but you cannot force them. The moment you release emotional attachment to things beyond your command, you reclaim your energy. You stop bleeding power into places that don't serve you, and suddenly you operate from a place of grounded authority. Let's look at relationships. When you care too much about someone liking you, you become easy to manipulate. You overgive, you overexplain, you overstay. But when you care less, when your identity is not dependent on their validation, you flip the dynamic. They begin to care more. They begin to chase. Because people are drawn to what is sovereign, not to what is desperate. Machiavelli would call this psychological warfare. He would say, men are driven by two principal impulses, either by love or by fear. If you're not commanding love, you better be commanding respect. And both require distance. Let's go deeper. In every interaction, there is a power balance. Someone is leading, someone is following. Someone is reacting, someone is directing. The one who cares less is always leading. They have the emotional detachment to make calculated decisions. They're not swayed by guilt, by pressure, by urgency. They move when it suits their strategy, not when others demand it. That level of control is magnetic. It creates gravitational pull. People orbit around those who don't need them. Now, ask yourself, how many times have you lost power because you cared too much? How many times have you begged for closure, chased after someone who ghosted you, overcommitted to a project that drained you, or defended yourself to people who had already made up their minds. Every time you did that, you lost leverage. You made their attention or approval more valuable than your own peace. And Machiavelli would say that's the first step to ruin. He wrote, "The one who adapts his policy to the times prospers, and likewise that the one whose policy clashes with the demands of the times does not." That means power lies in adaptation, not attachment. You gain control by adjusting your strategy, not by clinging to your emotions. The more flexible your mind, the more powerful your position. And flexibility only comes when you're not emotionally entangled. This is not a call to become stone-hearted, it's a call to become steel-minded, to care with precision, to love without losing yourself, to give without becoming dependent. Because Machiavelli never said to eliminate emotion, he said to manage it. He said to use it as a tool, not to become its slave. Imagine someone insults you. If you care too much, you feel the need to respond, to defend, to plead your case. But if you care less, you observe, you remain still, you let their words fall flat, and that silence is deafening. That lack of reaction is power, because now they're uncertain, now they're destabilized, now they're wondering what you're thinking. And in that moment, you've seized control. Can you feel how different that is? The one who cares less is not the one who loses. It's the one who sees everything, but chooses what to respond to. It's the one who is not pulled by every emotion, every opinion, every wave of noise. And that person becomes a fortress, unshaken, strategic, respected. Here's where it gets even deeper. When you care less about controlling others, you gain control over yourself. And when you control yourself, people begin to follow you, not because you demand it, but because you embody it. People follow certainty, they follow calm, they follow those who aren't emotionally erratic. And most people are addicted to chaos. So when they see someone who is unmoved, detached, and focused, they instinctively recognize leadership. Machiavelli said, "It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles." That means your power doesn't come from external labels, it comes from internal mastery. And mastery begins when you stop giving your energy to things that should never have had your attention in the first place. So, here's a question that will change your life. What would happen if you stopped caring about being understood, being praised, being liked, or even being forgiven? What if you only cared about your own alignment, your own clarity, your own mission? How would people treat you? Who would start chasing you? Who would fear losing you? Instead of assuming you'll always be there. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you increase your value. The moment you stop chasing, you become the one worth chasing. The moment you stop caring about controlling people, you start controlling outcomes. Because you're focused on what you can actually command, yourself. This is the Machiavellian equation. Care less, control more. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. Because you've seen what happens when you over-invest. Because you've felt the exhaustion of emotional dependency. And now, you're done with it. So from this point forward, let every move be deliberate. Let your silence speak louder. Let your indifference unsettle the ones who thought they had control. Let your calm become the storm they never saw coming. And let your ability to care less become the very reason you rise above them all. There's a moment in life where you realize that people who seem the most powerful don't necessarily have the most resources, the most friends, or the most charisma. They have something else, an invisible grip on the environment around them. They speak less, but everything they say lands. They act slowly, but everything they do shifts the room. And if you watch closely, you'll see the pattern. They don't care too much, they don't flinch, they don't chase. That's not detachment, it's design. It's a Machiavellian tactic to maintain control in a world that constantly tries to pull it away. Emotional control is the foundation of external control. That's why caring less is not about being cold, it's about being composed. When someone insults you, pressures you, ignores you, or tests your limits, your reaction is what gives them power. The moment you show desperation, they know they own the moment. But when you show indifference, when your face doesn't change, when your tone remains calm, you flip the script. Suddenly, they're unsure, they're off balance, and you've just taken control without lifting a finger. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, when, of the two, either must be dispensed with." This isn't an invitation to be cruel, it's a strategy to be respected. People respect what they cannot predict. They respect what is not easily moved. Your calm creates questions. Your indifference creates discomfort, and discomfort leads to recalibration. People start adjusting themselves to you, not the other way around. Let's go deeper. In relationships, whether romantic, professional, or social, the one who cares less almost always has more power. That doesn't mean they don't feel love, it means their identity isn't dependent on the relationship. The person who fears loss gives up leverage. They tolerate more, they bend more, they explain more. But the person who isn't afraid to walk away controls the direction. And that control comes from emotional discipline, not dominance. Ask yourself this: how many times have you overcommitted to people or situations because you feared disappointing someone? How many times have you said yes when you wanted to say no just to maintain peace? That's not kindness. That's emotional slavery, and Machiavelli would say, you become hated more for the things you do out of fear than the things you do out of strength. Because people sense when you're acting from weakness. They won't say it, but they feel it. And over time, that weakens your presence in their eyes. So how do we reverse this? You begin by reclaiming your time. You stop explaining decisions that don't need explanation. You stop reacting to every emotion. You stop trying to fix everyone's perception of you. When you care less about how you're seen, you begin to see everything more clearly. The noise fades, the fear fades, and what remains is clarity. And clarity is where control is born. This is how power is built silently, not with grand declarations, but with quiet boundaries, with stillness in chaos, with presence in discomfort. You become a force, not because you demand respect, but because you're unaffected by disrespect. That's what makes people pause. It's not your aggression, it's your refusal to be moved. But there's another layer. Caring less also means caring less about being right. Most people destroy their peace trying to prove a point. They argue endlessly. They defend themselves to people who are committed to misunderstanding them. But when you care less about who's right and more about who controls the frame, you win. Because the person who controls the frame controls the meaning. And the person who defines the meaning controls the mind. Machiavelli knew that perception is everything. He said, everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. That means Your power is not based on truth, it's based on perception. If you appear composed, strategic and powerful, people will treat you as such. And if you appear desperate, emotional and reactive, they'll treat you like a pawn, even if you're a king inside. So the question becomes, what are you signaling? Let's shift into the realm of influence. When you care less about being liked, you become more influential. Why? Because influence requires contrast. If you're always agreeable, always available, always pleasing, you blend into the background. But when you move with self-direction, when you say no, when you disappear, when you don't flinch, they notice. You become unpredictable, and unpredictability forces attention. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote, "A ruler must learn to act like both a lion and a fox. The lion represents force, the fox represents cunning, but both require emotional control. If you roar at everything, you become noise. If you deceive without cause, you become untrustworthy. But if you combine strength with restraint, you become untouchable." And that's the balance we must strike. Here's a psychological truth. People are drawn to what they can't fully understand. When you care too much, you show all your cards. You tell them exactly what you want, what you fear, what you need, and they use it. Sometimes unintentionally, sometimes strategically. But when you care less, when your desires are hidden, when your energy is self-contained, you become a puzzle, a mystery, and that mystery is power. Think of the most powerful people you've ever met or seen. They weren't the ones who talked the most. They were the ones who said little, moved precisely, and didn't chase. Their power wasn't in what they did, it was in what they didn't need to do. And that's the secret. When you care less, you stop needing. And when you stop needing, you start choosing. This is where the real transformation happens. You stop reacting to life and start designing it. You no longer act from fear, guilt, or desperation. You act from alignment, from intention, from strategy, and suddenly everything changes. People respect you more. Opportunities flow to you, not because you begged for them, but because you became the type of person who doesn't need them to feel whole. Let's go even deeper. What if every emotional outburst you've ever had was a leak in your power? What if every moment of over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-reacting was a signal to the world that you were not in command of yourself? That's a hard truth, but it's also liberating. Because it means your power isn't in someone else's hands. It's in your ability to regulate your own. So what do we do now? We train ourselves. We build stillness. We practice restraint. We learn to pause before responding. We learn to observe before reacting. We learn to detach before attaching. Because the one who cares less controls more. Not by force, but by presence. Not by domination, but by discipline. Let me ask you a question that will change how you move forever. Who in your life has power over you right now because you care more than they do? Think about that. Reflect on it. And then ask yourself, what would change if you shifted that dynamic? What would happen if you stopped depending on their validation, their attention, their approval? Would you shrink? Would you rise? There's a silence that comes after power is reclaimed. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. It's the silence of someone who no longer reacts, no longer explains, no longer chases. That silence is power in its purest form, because when you no longer need anything from anyone, you become untouchable. This is the essence of Machiavelli's power tactics. The less you care, the more control you gain. Not because you're emotionless, but because you've mastered which emotions deserve your energy and which ones are designed to enslave you. Most people live their lives at the mercy of their emotions. They care too much about being liked, being invited, being accepted, being seen. But every time you care from a place of need, you create a leash. And leashes are for the controlled, not the controller. Machiavelli said, "A wise man ought always to follow the paths beaten by great men, and to imitate those who have been supreme." And what do the supreme men do? They control themselves first. Their responses, their desires, their attachments, they move with intention, not impulse. Let's talk about your daily life. Every time you check your phone obsessively after sending a message, you've given control away. Every time you argue to prove a point that doesn't need proving, you've leaked power. Every time you say yes when you want to say no just to keep the peace, you've made your will secondary. And every time you emotionally invest in an outcome you do not control, you become a slave to chance. That's not strength, that's surrender. Quiet, invisible surrender that looks like caring but is actually submission to instability. So what's the alternative? You move like the architect of your life. You care only where it multiplies your influence. You speak only when silence would cost you more. You invest only where your return is power, not just emotion. This is the difference between living as a reaction and living as a strategy. The first makes you a piece on the board. The second makes you the player. And Machiavelli would never settle for being a piece. And there's a concept in psychology called internal locus of control. It means you believe your outcomes stem from your own actions, not from the whims of others. People with an internal locus of control are calmer, stronger, more deliberate. They don't panic when others withdraw. They don't beg when things don't go their way. They observe, they adjust, they act. That's the mindset we must develop, because without it, you're always at the mercy of someone else's validation. Think about how you show up in relationships. Do you give more than you should because you fear losing them? Do you tolerate disrespect because you care more about keeping them than keeping your dignity? Do you stay silent when you're hurt because you're afraid of rocking the boat? That's not love. That's fear wearing a mask. And Machiavelli warned us of this. He said, "It is a common fault of men not to reckon on storms in fair weather," meaning when things feel good, we forget the need to prepare for loss. And when loss comes, it crushes those who cared too much and prepared too little. If you want real power, you must learn to detach from the illusion that caring deeply equals strength. Caring deeply without boundaries is a weapon aimed at your own peace. The more you care about being understood, the easier it is to manipulate you. The more you care about keeping someone at all costs, the more likely you are to betray yourself. And no external relationship is worth the internal betrayal of abandoning your own standards. Now, let's talk about control, not of people, but of space. The room, the energy, the dynamic. The person who controls the space is the one who cares least about pleasing everyone in it. They walk in with their energy intact. They don't scan for approval. They don't chase validation. They take their time. They speak with weight. They let others adjust to them. That is presence. That is command. And it doesn't come from volume. It comes from emotional independence. Machiavelli said, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. Who surrounds you right now? Are they people who respect your boundaries or people who take advantage of your care? Are they aligned with your vision or simply feeding off your energy? You don't attract what you want, you attract what you tolerate. And if you tolerate chaos, neediness and disrespect, don't be surprised when you're surrounded by people who feed on your inability to detach. The moment you begin to care less about who stays and care more about who aligns, everything changes. Suddenly, you're no longer asking, "Do they like me?" You're asking, "Do they add power to my life or drain it?" And that shift is revolutionary. Because now, you're not reacting to people, you're selecting them. That's control. That's Machiavellian, but here's where it gets counterintuitive. The less you care from need, the more people begin to seek you. Why? Because most people are addicted to being needed. When they meet someone who doesn't need them, but chooses them, they feel challenged, they feel admiration, even confusion. Your indifference becomes a magnet, your silence becomes a mirror, and your decision to walk away becomes more powerful than any attempt to stay. Let me ask you a dangerous question. What would your life look like if you stopped caring about being chosen and instead focused on choosing? What would happen if you stopped auditioning for rooms you were meant to lead? If you stopped explaining your worth and simply let your presence make the statement? That's not arrogance. That's power, matured through pain. We've all been through moments where caring too much broke us, where we gave and gave, hoping to be seen, to be valued, to be kept. But Machiavelli would tell you, stop asking to be kept. Keep yourself. Crown yourself. And from that throne, invite only those who understand the currency of your peace. From now on, every time you feel the urge to over-explain, pause. Every time you feel the need to prove your point, breathe. Every time you want to chase someone pulling away, stop. Let your stillness do the talking. Let your silence set the boundary. Let your absence carry the weight, because the person who cares less doesn't lose. They lead. And if you're wondering, but what if they leave because I stop caring? The answer is simple. Let them. If your detachment reveals their disloyalty, you didn't lose power. You discovered truth, and truth is the foundation of real control. Truth doesn't need permission. It doesn't need applause. It simply stands. So from this moment on, let your strategy outpace your emotion. Let your mind lead your heart. Let your control override your care. Because in a world addicted to reaction, your calm is a weapon, your detachment is a shield, and your ability to walk away without flinching is the final form of freedom. Care less, control more, not because you're broken, but because you finally decided to stop being broken by the things that never deserved your full heart in the first place,